The Carmichael mansion stood at the far edge of Vermont's rolling countryside, a massive stone structure built in another century. When elegance mattered more than comfort and silence was considered dignity, the mansion had survived wars, storms, and the death of generations, but it could not hide the gloom that had settled within its walls. After the death of Robert Carmichael, the patriarch of the family, the place felt colder than ever. Like grief itself had become another resident haunting every corridor. Isabella Carmichael returned after years of self-imposed exile in New York. She had left this house behind after high school, choosing bright city lights over the suffocating traditions of her family. But when her father died suddenly of a heart attack, there was no escape. She stepped out of the cab, onto the gravel driveway, and looked up at the looming facade. The windows were tall and dark, reflecting nothing of the warm sun that bathed the hills. To her, the mansion looked like a judge waiting to sentence her. The air smelled faintly of pine and rain-soaked earth, but underneath it lingered the old scent she remembered too well. Dust, wood polish, and the bitterness of memories. Inside, the great hall stretched out like a cavern. Marble floors reflected the dim light of the chandelier that had not been cleaned in months. Portraits of ancestors stared down from the walls, painted in oil with eyes that seemed to follow anyone daring to move through the house. Isabella paused at the foot of the grand staircase, her suitcase in her hand, and felt a wave of heaviness press on her chest. The silence was unbearable, broken only by the creak of the wood and the ticking of a clock somewhere, deep in the house. She heard footsteps, slow and deliberate, and turned to see her elder brother, Charles, descending the staircase. He was dressed in black, as though he had never left morning clothes since the funeral. His face was pale, sharper than she remembered, with lines of anger and exhaustion carved into his features. He didn't embrace her. He didn't even smile. "You came," he said simply, his tone halfway between surprise and resignation. "I had to," Isabella answered. "It was Father." Charles's lips curved into something that could barely be called a smile. "Father would have been pleased. Though I'm not sure he expected you to stay." Isabella flinched at his words. He had always known how to turn affection into accusation, warmth into suspicion. They walked together into the living room, where heavy velvet curtains kept out most of the light. The fire in the hearth had burned low, leaving only smoldering ashes. Their cousin Evelyn sat near the window, her slender figure wrapped in a shawl despite the mild weather. She was staring at nothing, her spoon resting untouched in a half-empty cup of tea. She looked up only briefly when Isabella entered, offering a small nod before lowering her eyes again. The dinner that evening was tense. The three of them sat around the massive, mahogany dining table that could easily seat 20, though only 3 places were set. Silver candlesticks flickered, throwing long shadows across the walls. The meal was served by Martha, the aging housekeeper who had worked for the family since before Isabella was born. The silence was broken only by the faint clinking of silverware until Isabella forced herself to speak. "I think Father would have wanted us to stay together," she said softly. Charles's fork paused midair. He looked at her with sharp eyes. "Father wanted many things, Izzy. Not all of them came true." Evelyn shifted uncomfortably in her chair, pretending to study the flame of the candle. Isabella's stomach twisted. She remembered how close she had been to her father, how often he had confided in her when Charles was too busy with business and Evelyn too fragile to handle the truth. Her father had believed in her, had even told her that she carried the strength of her late mother. Charles knew this, and it had poisoned their relationship since childhood. That night, Isabella could not sleep. The mansion seemed alive, every groan of wood, every gust of wind against the windows sounding like whispers of the dead. She wandered through the corridors until she found herself outside her father's study. The door creaked as she pushed it open. The room smelled faintly of tobacco and leather. Bookshelves climbed from floor to ceiling, filled with volumes of law, history, and philosophy. Papers were scattered across the desk, yellowed with time. Her eyes fell on a leather-bound diary half hidden beneath a stack of envelopes. She hesitated before picking it up. The cover was cracked, the edges worn. She opened it carefully, recognizing her father's neat handwriting. The first entries were ordinary, notes about estate expenses, thoughts on the weather, reflections on the family gatherings that never quite felt like family. But as she turned the pages, the tone shifted. His words grew darker, filled with doubt and unease. "They think I don't see, but I know. Betrayal grows inside these walls like mold. Isabella's hands trembled as she read further. Charles cannot be trusted with everything. Evelyn is too fragile, too bound by her own grief. And Izzy, my sweet Izzy, I fear she will be hurt most when the truth comes. Her throat tightened. She kept reading. If the truth comes to light, this house will burn with it. Secrets are poison, and I fear it will kill us all. Isabella shut the diary with a thud, her breath quick and shallow. She felt the weight of her father's words pressing against her chest. What secrets? What poison? And why had he feared for her above all? She replaced the diary exactly where she had found it, though every fiber of her being wanted to take it back to her room. As she turned to leave, she caught a movement outside the study window. A shadow, tall and unmistakable, standing just beyond the glass. But when she pulled the curtains aside, the courtyard was empty. The next morning, while she stood on the veranda, Isabella saw him again, a stranger at the iron gates of the mansion. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark coat despite the warmth of the day. His gray eyes met hers across the distance, and for a moment, she felt as if he had been waiting for her all along. "Can I help you?" she called, stepping down the stone stairs. The man removed his hat slowly, his gaze never leaving hers. "My name is Daniel Whitmore. I knew your father." The name meant nothing to her. Her father had never mentioned him, yet there was something unsettlingly familiar in his eyes, as if they carried stories she should already know. "My father never spoke of you," Isabella said carefully. Daniel smiled faintly. Though it wasn't warmth, it was more like a secret wrapped in sorrow. "That doesn't mean I didn't matter." She felt a shiver despite the sun on her skin. Something told her his presence was not accidental. His timing, his gaze, even the weight of his words felt orchestrated by fate, or by something darker. That night, as she sat in her room, Isabella thought of him again. She tried to dismiss it as curiosity, perhaps even pity, but deep down she knew it was more. Something about him unsettled her, pulled her closer even as her instincts warned her to stay away. Charles, however, was less restrained. When he learned of Daniel's presence near the mansion, his anger erupted. "Strangers don't just show up here, Izzy. Especially not now. He wants something, money, land, or worse. Don't let him fool you." Isabella met his eyes firmly. And what if he doesn't? What if he knows something about father we don't? Charles's jaw tightened, his fists clenching at his sides. Some truths are better buried. Remember that. But Isabella could not forget the words in her father's diary, or the look in Daniel Whitmore's eyes. The mansion was a cage of secrets, and she was beginning to realize that some of those secrets might destroy them all. The following days in the Carmichael mansion turned into a silent war. Isabella avoided Charles whenever she could, though he always seemed to linger nearby, watching her with hawk-like suspicion. Evelyn tried to keep the peace, but her delicate frame and trembling voice carried no weight in the growing storm. Isabella felt trapped between two worlds, the suffocating safety Charles demanded and the dangerous truth Daniel offered. Every night Isabella replayed Daniel's words, "He was my brother." She heard the bitterness in his voice, the grief hidden beneath it. The idea of her father having a brother he had abandoned gnawed at her soul. She thought of the empty years her father had spent brooding by the fireplace, his eyes distant as if haunted by ghosts. Perhaps Daniel was that ghost, returning now to claim what had been stolen. On the third night, Isabella could no longer bear the questions clawing at her mind. She slipped from her bed, wrapped in a shawl, and lit a candle. The diary lay open on the desk. This time she searched more carefully, scanning every margin for clues. At last, near the back, she found a torn page tucked between two entries. The handwriting was more frantic, jagged with guilt. "The Whitmore blood is my curse. I chose wealth, and in doing so, I buried my brother beneath the ashes of betrayal. Should he ever return, may my daughter forgive me for the sins I forced her to inherit." Her throat tightened. She pressed the page to her chest, tears stinging her eyes. Forgiveness. That was what her father had feared, her ability to forgive. What he had done, or perhaps her inability. The next morning, Isabella confronted Evelyn again. "You knew," Isabella said, her voice trembling. "You knew my father had a brother." Evelyn's face turned pale, her hands twisting nervously. "I was a child when it happened, Izzy. Your father never spoke of him, except once. He said the Whitmore boy was dangerous, reckless, a stain on the family name." "Dangerous?" Isabella echoed. "Or simply unwanted?" Evelyn looked away, her silence a heavier answer than words. Later, Charles entered the room without knocking. "You've been digging again," he accused. His eyes flicked to the diary on the desk. "You should burn that before it destroys you." "Or before it destroys you?" Isabella shot back. The muscle in Charles's jaw twitched. He took a step closer, lowering his voice. "You think you're clever, but you're just playing with fire. Daniel Whitmore isn't your salvation. Izzy, he's here for revenge, and he'll use you to get it. Don't be naive." Isabella met his gaze fiercely. "If there's revenge to be had, Charles, perhaps it's because this family deserves it." For the first time, his mask cracked. His eyes hardened and his voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "Careful, Isabella. Blood is not as forgiving as you think." That night, unable to fight the pull any longer, Isabella left the mansion again. The moon hung low, silvering the garden with a ghostly glow. At the edge of the estate, Daniel stood waiting as though he knew she would come. "You shouldn't be here," he said softly. "Neither should you," she replied. "But here we are." His mouth curved in the faintest shadow of a smile. For a moment, the bitterness in him seemed to ease. He looked at her as if searching for fragments of his brother in her face. "You have his eyes," Daniel said quietly. "The same fire?" "The same stubbornness." Isabella's chest tightened. "Tell me everything. Tell me why my father betrayed you." Daniel hesitated, the wind tugging at his coat. "We were boys when the Carmichaels chose their path. Our family owned land the Carmichaels wanted. They offered money, influence, promises of a future. My brother took their side. He abandoned me, left me to scrape through life while he sat in their grand halls. To him, blood was less valuable than gold." His voice hardened. "And now I'm here, not because I want his fortune, but because I want the truth uncovered. People like Charles would rather bury me alive than let you see what kind of man your father really was." Isabella felt her heart twist with conflicting emotions, grief for the father she had loved, anger at his silence, and a strange, dangerous pull toward the man standing before her. Daniel carried scars her family had carved, and yet she couldn't look away from him. "You want revenge," she said finally. "Yes," Daniel admitted, his eyes never leaving hers. "But I didn't expect you. I didn't expect to find someone who could make me doubt the darkness I've carried all these years." The air between them grew charged, heavy with unspoken tension. Isabella's breath quickened. She should have been afraid, should have walked away. But instead she whispered, "Maybe you don't have to carry it alone anymore." For a heartbeat, Daniel's expression softened. But then footsteps echoed through the night. Charles again, his lantern slicing through the shadows. "Enough!" Charles roared. He strode forward, seizing Isabella's arm. "Do you have any idea what you're doing? He's poison, Izzy. He'll ruin you." Daniel stepped forward, his hand closing around Charles's wrist. "And what are you, Charles? Her protector? Or just another jailer keeping her from the truth?" The two men glared at each other, the tension snapping like a drawn bowstring. Isabella tore free from Charles's grip, standing between them. "Stop!" she cried. "I won't be pulled apart like this. If either of you truly care about me, then give me the truth. All of it, no more lies." For a long moment, neither man spoke. The night pressed heavy around them, the only sound the rustle of leaves in the wind. Finally, Charles released a harsh breath. "You want the truth?" he said bitterly. "Fine, your father betrayed Daniel, yes. But Daniel is not the victim he pretends to be. He was reckless, violent. He burned bridges and left chaos behind. Your father cut him out because he had no choice. He wanted to protect you from this man." Daniel's eyes flashed. "That's a lie. You'd rewrite history if it kept your pockets full. You've always been a coward, Charles." The air felt electric, charged with fury and hurt. Isabella's heart hammered in her chest. Both men were drowning her in half-truths, and she didn't know which fragments to trust. "Enough," she whispered, tears sliding down her cheeks. "Both of you, enough." She turned and fled into the darkness, her shawl trailing behind her. She didn't stop until she reached the edge of the woods, her body trembling. She leaned against a tree, her sobs echoing in the silence. For the first time in her life, Isabella Carmichael realized she stood utterly alone. Her father's memory had shattered. Her family's loyalty was poison, and the only man who might hold answers was also the one who might destroy her. And yet, in the quiet of the night, a single thought burned in her heart. She could not walk away from Daniel Whitmore. Not now, not ever. The following days in the Carmichael mansion turned into a silent war. Isabella avoided Charles whenever she could, though he always seemed to linger nearby, watching her with hawk-like suspicion. Evelyn tried to keep the peace, but her delicate frame and trembling voice carried no weight in the growing storm. Isabella felt trapped between two worlds, the suffocating safety Charles demanded and the dangerous truth Daniel offered. Every night Isabella replayed Daniel's words, "He was my brother." She heard the bitterness in his voice, the grief hidden beneath it. The idea of her father having a brother he had abandoned gnawed at her soul. She thought of the empty years her father had spent brooding by the fireplace, his eyes distant as if haunted by ghosts. Perhaps Daniel was that ghost, returning now to claim what had been stolen. On the third night, Isabella could no longer bear the questions clawing at her mind. She slipped from her bed, wrapped in a shawl, and lit a candle. The diary lay open on the desk. This time she searched more carefully, scanning every margin for clues. At last, near the back, she found a torn page tucked between two entries. The handwriting was more frantic, jagged with guilt. "The Whitmore blood is my curse. I chose wealth, and in doing so, I buried my brother beneath the ashes of betrayal. Should he ever return? May my daughter forgive me for the sins I forced her to inherit." Her throat tightened. She pressed the page to her chest, tears stinging her eyes. Forgiveness. That was what her father had feared, her ability to forgive what he had done, or perhaps her inability. The next morning, Isabella confronted Evelyn again. "You knew," Isabella said, her voice trembling. "You knew my father had a brother." Evelyn's face turned pale, her hands twisting nervously. "I was a child when it happened, Izzy. Your father never spoke of him except once. He said the Whitmore boy was dangerous, reckless, a stain on the family name." "Dangerous?" Isabella echoed. "Or simply unwanted?" Evelyn looked away, her silence a heavier answer than words. Later, Charles entered the room without knocking. "You've been digging again," he accused. His eyes flicked to the diary on the desk. "You should burn that before it destroys you." "Or before it destroys you?" Isabella shot back. The muscle in Charles's jaw twitched. He took a step closer, lowering his voice. "You think you're clever, but you're just playing with fire. Daniel Whitmore isn't your salvation, Izzy. He's here for revenge, and he'll use you to get it." "Don't be naive." Isabella met his gaze fiercely. "If there's revenge to be had, Charles, perhaps it's because this family deserves it." For the first time, his mask cracked. His eyes hardened, and his voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "Careful, Isabella. Blood is not as forgiving as you think." That night, unable to fight the pull any longer, Isabella left the mansion again. The moon hung low, silvering the garden with a ghostly glow. At the edge of the estate, Daniel stood waiting as though he knew she would come. "You shouldn't be here," he said softly. "Neither should you," she replied. "But here we are." His mouth curved in the faintest shadow of a smile. For a moment, the bitterness in him seemed to ease. He looked at her as if searching for fragments of his brother in her face. "You have his eyes," Daniel said quietly. "The same fire. The same stubbornness." Isabella's chest tightened. "Tell me everything. Tell me why my father betrayed you." Daniel hesitated, the wind tugging at his coat. "We were boys when the Carmichaels chose their path. Our family owned land the Carmichaels wanted. They offered money, influence, promises of a future. My brother took their side. He abandoned me, left me to scrape through life while he sat in their grand halls. To him, blood was less valuable than gold." His voice hardened. "And now I'm here, not because I want his fortune, but because I want the truth uncovered. People like Charles would rather bury me alive than let you see what kind of man your father really was." Isabella felt her heart twist with conflicting emotions, grief for the father she had loved, anger at his silence, and a strange, dangerous pull toward the man standing before her. Daniel carried scars her family had carved, and yet she couldn't look away from him. "You want revenge," she said finally. "Yes," Daniel admitted, his eyes never leaving hers. "But I didn't expect you. I didn't expect to find someone who could make me doubt the darkness I've carried all these years." The air between them grew charged, heavy with unspoken tension. Isabella's breath quickened. She should have been afraid, should have walked away, but instead she whispered, "Maybe you don't have to carry it alone anymore." For a heartbeat, Daniel's expression softened, but then footsteps echoed through the night. Charles again, his lantern slicing through the shadows. "Enough!" Charles roared. He strode forward, seizing Isabella's arm. "Do you have any idea what you're doing? He's poison, Izzy. He'll ruin you." Daniel stepped forward, his hand closing around Charles's wrist. "And what are you, Charles? Her protector? Or just another jailer keeping her from the truth? The two men glared at each other, the tension snapping like a drawn bowstring. Isabella tore free from Charles's grip, standing between them. "Stop," she cried. "I won't be pulled apart like this. If either of you truly care about me, then give me the truth. All of it, no more lies." For a long moment, neither man spoke. The night pressed heavy around them, the only sound the rustle of leaves in the wind. Finally, Charles released a harsh breath. "You want the truth?" he said bitterly. "Fine, your father betrayed Daniel, yes. But Daniel is not the victim he pretends to be. He was reckless, violent. He burned bridges and left chaos behind. Your father cut him out because he had no choice. He wanted to protect you from this man." Daniel's eyes flashed. "That's a lie. You'd rewrite history if it kept your pockets full." "You've always been a coward, Charles." The air felt electric, charged with fury and hurt. Isabella's heart hammered in her chest. Both men were drowning her in half-truths, and she didn't know which fragments to trust. "Enough," she whispered, tears sliding down her cheeks. "Both of you, enough." She turned and fled into the darkness, her shawl trailing behind her. She didn't stop until she reached the edge of the woods, her body trembling. She leaned against a tree, her sobs echoing in the silence. For the first time in her life, Isabella Carmichael realized she stood utterly alone. Her father's memory had shattered. Her family's loyalty was poison, and the only man who might hold answers was also the one who might destroy her. And yet, in the quiet of the night, a single thought burned in her heart. She could not walk away from Daniel Whitmore. Not now, not ever. The morning after Isabella fled into the woods, the Carmichael mansion felt heavier than ever. A pale mist clung to the gardens, and the halls inside seemed darker, as though the walls themselves carried the echoes of her choices. She hadn't slept, her gown still damp with night dew when she returned at dawn, her eyes rimmed with exhaustion. Evelyn found her in the parlor, curled on the sofa with her arms around her knees, staring at the fireplace as if searching for ghosts in the ashes. "Isabella," Evelyn whispered gently, crouching beside her. "You're trembling. What happened out there?" Isabella shook her head. "I don't know what's true anymore. My father's diary says one thing, Charles another, and Daniel—" She trailed off, her voice breaking. "Daniel is a storm I can't escape, Evelyn. Every time I think I should run, I feel pulled back to him." Evelyn pressed her hand to Isabella's. "Then maybe it's not about running or staying. Maybe it's about deciding whose truth you can live with." But that was the very thing tearing Isabella apart. Whose truth was real? Her father had lied by omission. Charles seemed desperate to protect something more than just her safety, and Daniel carried anger that made his words burn like fire. Somewhere in the middle was a truth sharp enough to cut her open. Later that day, Charles summoned her to the library. His tone carried no room for refusal. When she entered, he was already pacing, his hands clasped behind his back, the firelight making his face look older, harsher. "You're making a fool of yourself," he began without preamble. "Do you have any idea how the townspeople are talking? They've seen you wandering at night, meeting with that man in the shadows. Do you want to destroy everything your father built?" Isabella squared her shoulders, refusing to cower. "Maybe he didn't build anything worth saving if he built it on lies." His eyes narrowed. "So Daniel's poisoned you already. I warned you, Izzy. He's not here for reconciliation. He's here to tear us apart. And if you keep giving him the chance, he'll succeed." "What are you so afraid of?" Isabella demanded. "If Daniel is lying, then prove it. Show me evidence. Show me something that justifies this hatred. Because right now, all I see is you trying to silence me." For a moment, Charles said nothing. His jaw clenched, and then slowly, he walked to the desk. He pulled open a drawer and retrieved a bundle of yellowed papers tied with string. Tossing them onto the desk, he said, "You want the truth? Read this." Isabella hesitated before untying the bundle. The papers were old letters, ink-smudged, edges torn. She read quickly, her eyes widening. The letters were from Daniel, written years ago, filled with desperate pleas and accusations. "You took everything from me. You let them call me worthless while you sat in their golden halls. One day I'll come back, and you'll regret every lie you told." Isabella looked up, her chest tight. He was angry. "But wouldn't you be if your brother abandoned you?" "Read further," Charles said sharply. She did, and her heart sank. One letter described a fight that had ended in blood. Another spoke of debts owed to dangerous men. Another hinted at betrayal so deep it had cost lives. "Daniel wasn't just cast out because of greed," Charles said coldly. He made enemies, Izzy. He was reckless. Your father kept you safe by keeping him out. Don't you see? That man will destroy you the way he destroyed everything else. Isabella dropped the papers onto the desk, her hands trembling. The words were there in ink, but still, something in her resisted believing them entirely. Letters written in anger could twist truths, could exaggerate sins. And if Daniel had written them from a place of desperation, then perhaps his rage was the only language he had left. That night, Isabella returned to the garden. The air was sharp with the scent of pine and the promise of another storm. Daniel was waiting, as she knew he would be, his figure a dark silhouette against the pale moonlight. "You've been reading my past," he said without greeting. His voice was calm, but his eyes burned. "Charles has been feeding you poison, hasn't he?" "They were your letters," Isabella whispered. "Your words." "Yes," Daniel admitted, stepping closer. "My words written when the world turned its back on me. When your father left me to rot while he dined, with men who would never forgive me for being less polished, less obedient. I was desperate, Izzy. Desperation breeds fury. But don't mistake fury for lies." Isabella's heart twisted painfully. "And the debts? The blood?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "Debts paid in hunger. Blood spilled in survival. I didn't choose that life. It was forced on me when your family closed its doors. If you want to judge me for clawing my way out of the gutter, then go ahead. But don't pretend your father's hands were clean while mine bled." She closed her eyes, fighting back tears. Every word he spoke pulled her deeper into the storm. She wanted to believe him, wanted to see him as the victim of cruelty rather than the villain Charles painted him to be. But the shadows of those letters clung to her, whispering doubts she couldn't silence. When she opened her eyes again, Daniel was closer, so close she could feel the heat of him. His voice softened. "I never came here for wealth, Isabella. I came here for the truth, and for the chance to look into your eyes and see if redemption was possible. Do you think I'd risk everything if all I wanted was gold?" Her breath caught, her heart hammering wildly. She should have pulled back, but instead she whispered, "Then what is it you want?" His gaze locked on hers, fierce and unyielding. "You." The word trembled in the air between them, heavy and undeniable. Isabella felt the world tilt beneath her feet. For a heartbeat, the mansion, the lies, the betrayals, all of it disappeared. There was only him, raw and wounded and unbreakable, and the terrifying pull between them that felt like both salvation and ruin. Before she could speak, footsteps crunched behind her. Evelyn's voice called out, shaky and filled with dread. "Izzy, please come inside. It isn't safe out here." Daniel's jaw clenched, but he stepped back into the shadows. "Go," he said quietly. "But remember this. I won't stop until you know the whole truth, even if it burns us both." Isabella turned, her heart torn in two, and followed Evelyn back into the house. But as she crossed the threshold of the mansion, she knew her life had already changed. Whether it ended in love or ruin, Daniel Whitmore had marked her forever. Sleep refused to come to Isabella that night. She lay awake in her bed, staring at the carved ceiling, the sound of the wind rattling the windows. Every word Daniel had spoken echoed in her head, his fury, his grief, his confession of wanting her. She pressed her hand to her chest as if to calm the wild rhythm of her heart, but nothing stilled the storm inside her. At dawn, she rose and wandered the halls. The portraits of her ancestors lined the walls, their cold eyes following her steps. She paused at her father's portrait, the stern face that had once been her source of safety and pride. Now she wondered what secrets those eyes had hidden. Could he have truly betrayed his own brother so cruelly? Could he have knowingly left Daniel to suffer while he built his empire on silence? She touched the frame gently, her voice a whisper. "Why didn't you tell me the truth?" Behind her, a soft creak made her turn. Evelyn stood in the doorway, her nightgown fluttering slightly as she wrapped her arms around herself. "You're awake early," she murmured. "I couldn't sleep," Isabella's voice broke. "Evelyn, I don't know who to trust. Charles says Daniel is dangerous. Daniel says father betrayed him. And all I can feel is this pull toward him. As if," she hesitated, then admitted, "as if I belong to him somehow." Evelyn's face paled. She stepped closer, her voice hushed. "Izzy, listen to me. You don't belong to anyone. Not Charles, not Daniel, not even the ghost of your father. You belong to yourself. But if you give too much of your heart to the wrong man, you'll lose yourself before you even realize it." Isabella reached for Evelyn's hand. "Then tell me the truth. Did father ever speak of Daniel to you?" Evelyn's eyes glistened with tears. "Only once, when I was very young. I heard them fighting. Daniel was begging to stay and your father told him to leave. That there was no place for weakness in the Carmichael family. Afterward, father forbade us to mention him again. But I never forgot the look in Daniel's eyes when he left. It was the look of someone who had lost everything. Isabella's chest tightened. So Evelyn had seen him 2 years ago. Daniel's story was not a fabrication. The scars he carried were real. But still, shadows lingered around his choices. The violence in his past, the debts whispered in letters. By midday, Charles summoned Isabella again. His patience was wearing thin, his voice sharper with every exchange. I see it in your eyes, he said. You're falling under his spell. Don't make the mistake of confusing danger with desire. Her cheeks flushed, but she refused to lower her gaze. And what mistake are you making, Charles? Pretending you're protecting me, when all you're really protecting is your own grip on this estate? His expression darkened. You think I care about this crumbling mansion? No, I care about what happens when the Whitmore curse returns to claim you. Your father may have made mistakes, but Daniel, he's not your savior. He'll drag you into the same ruin that destroyed him. Isabella turned sharply, her voice trembling with fury. You speak as though you know what destroyed him. But you weren't there, Charles. None of us were. So don't presume to rewrite his story. Before he could respond, she stormed out, leaving him fuming in the library. That evening, Isabella slipped once more to the edge of the estate. She knew it was dangerous, knew Charles would explode if he discovered her. But the pull was irresistible. And as if bound by fate, Daniel was waiting. You shouldn't keep coming, he said softly when she approached. Every time you do, you risk everything. Then why do you keep waiting for me? She asked, her voice trembling. He didn't answer with words. Instead, his hand reached out, brushing lightly against hers, the touch sending a shiver through her entire body. His eyes searched hers, not demanding, not pleading, but asking silently if she would step closer to him or retreat. Isabella swallowed hard, then whispered, Because I can't stay away. For a long moment, silence stretched between them, filled only by the rustling of leaves in the night wind. Daniel finally spoke, his voice low and fierce. Your father's choices destroyed us both. But maybe we don't have to keep living in his shadow. Maybe we can choose differently. Her heart pounded. And what would that mean? It would mean trusting me, he said, even when the world tells you not to. It would mean standing against Charles, against the lies, against the bloodline that tried to erase me. The weight of his words pressed on her. She thought of Evelyn's warning, of Charles's fury, of the way her father's diary spoke of betrayal. Every path led to danger, but the thought of turning away from Daniel felt like cutting off a part of her soul. She whispered, If I trust you, it could destroy me. And if you don't, Daniel murmured, you'll never know if it could have saved you. Their eyes locked, and for a breathless moment, the world seemed to fall away. The mansion, the lies, the betrayals, all of it faded into silence. All that remained was the electric pull between them, fragile yet unbreakable. But before Isabella could answer, a sound shattered the stillness, a snapping branch, a heavy footstep. Charles emerged from the shadows, his face twisted with rage, a pistol glinting in his hand. I warned you, he snarled. I told you he'd ruin you. But if you won't listen, then I'll end this myself. Isabella froze, her heart lurching into her throat. Daniel stepped in front of her instinctively, his body shielding hers. His voice was calm but cold as steel. Go ahead, Charles. Pull the trigger. But understand this, killing me won't erase the truth. It will only stain your hands with more blood than your family already carries. Charles's hand shook with fury, the pistol wavering between them. You don't belong here, he spat. And neither does she if she sides with you. Charles, Isabella cried, stepping forward. Stop this madness. If you kill him, you'll be proving everything he says about you. Her words hung in the air, trembling with desperation. For a long, terrible moment, no one moved. Then, with a guttural curse, Charles lowered the pistol slightly, though his eyes still burned with hatred. This isn't over, he hissed. You'll see him for what he really is soon enough. And when you do, I'll be the one left to pick up your broken pieces. He turned and stormed away, his footsteps echoing like thunder through the trees. Isabella's knees gave way, and she collapsed against Daniel, her whole body shaking. His arms wrapped around her, firm and steady. You're safe, he murmured, though the tremor in his own voice betrayed the storm raging inside him. For the first time, Isabella allowed herself to lean into him fully. her tears soaking into his coat. She didn't know what the future held, didn't know if trusting him would save her or destroy her. But in that moment, wrapped in his arms, she knew one thing. With absolute certainty, she could no longer imagine her life without Daniel Whitmore. The mansion grew colder in the days that followed the confrontation in the garden. Charles no longer tried to mask his anger. His eyes burned with suspicion every time he looked at Isabella, and the weight of his silence pressed harder than his words ever could. Evelyn tiptoed around both of them, her gentle nature unable to withstand the tension that threatened to suffocate the house. Isabella herself moved like a ghost, torn between dread and yearning. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the pistol glinting in Charles's hand, heard the venom in his voice. And yet she also remembered the fierce protectiveness in Daniel's stance, the way he shielded her as if her life mattered more than his own. That memory lived in her chest like a brand, searing her whenever doubt crept in. One evening, as rain lashed the windows, Isabella sat in the library with her father's diary open across her lap. She had read the same passage a dozen times, her eyes tracing the words without seeing them. If Daniel returns, the choice will not be mine to make but hers. What choice had her father meant? To forgive? To destroy? Or something far darker? The crack of the door startled her. Charles stepped in, his boots echoing against the wood floor. He carried no lantern, only the sharp scent of whiskey that clung to him. "You think you're clever," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Sneaking out at night, meeting him in secret? Do you think I don't see it? Do you think I don't know where your loyalties lie?" Isabella stood, clutching the diary to her chest. "My loyalty is to the truth. If that threatens you, perhaps you're hiding more than I thought." He stalked closer, his eyes narrowing. "You don't know what you're playing with. Daniel isn't some wounded soul waiting for redemption. He's a wolf and you're letting him bare his teeth. When he turns on you, and he will, I won't be there to pick up the pieces." Her hand trembled, but she forced her voice steady. "And what if you're wrong? What if he's the only one who has ever told me the truth?" Charles's lip curled in a bitter smile. "Then you're more naive than I thought." He turned sharply and left, the door slamming shut behind him. Isabella's chest ached with unshed tears. She pressed the diary to her heart, wishing her father were alive to answer the questions tearing her apart. But perhaps he had known all along that this would be her burden, to choose between blood and betrayal, between safety and love. The next night, Isabella found herself once more drawn to the garden. Daniel was there, as though he had been waiting all day, the storm wind tugging at his coat. "You shouldn't risk this," he said, though his voice carried no conviction. "And yet you're here," she whispered. For a moment, neither moved. Then Daniel stepped closer, his hand brushing against hers, and she felt the strength in his touch, the heat that banished the cold of the storm. "Izzy," he murmured, the nickname slipping past his lips as if he had known her all his life. "I told myself I came here for justice, for revenge. But every time I see you, I feel myself unraveling. You are the one thing I never expected." Her breath caught. "And what am I, Daniel? Your chance at redemption? Or just another weapon in your war against my family?" He flinched, as though the words struck deep. "You're not a weapon. You're the reason I've started to believe there might be more than revenge. When I look at you, I see what was stolen from me, the love, the family, the life I was denied. And yet I don't want to take it. I want to share it with you." Tears burned Isabella's eyes. She wanted to believe him, wanted to let herself fall into the promise of his words. But the shadows of doubt lingered, whispering that love born of betrayal could only end in ruin. Before she could speak, Evelyn's voice cut through the night. "Izzy?" She appeared at the garden's edge, clutching a shawl tight around her shoulders. When she saw Daniel, she froze, fear flashing in her eyes. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered urgently. "Charles is searching for you. If he finds you with him—" Daniel's jaw tightened. "Let him come." "No," Isabella said quickly, stepping forward. "Not tonight." "Go, Daniel, please." For a moment, he looked as if he would refuse. But then he reached for her hand, pressing a rough kiss to her knuckles. "I'll go," he said softly. "But remember, my truth doesn't vanish just because Charles shouts louder." When he disappeared into the shadows, Evelyn rushed to Isabella's side. "Izzy, what are you doing?" "He's dangerous. I saw him years ago, and I'll never forget the fury in his eyes. That fury hasn't gone away, it's grown." Isabella's voice trembled. And yet, when I'm with him, I don't feel fear. I feel alive. Evelyn shook her head, tears welling. Alive or destroyed, it's a thin line. Don't mistake passion for safety. Izzy, Charles may be cruel, but Daniel could consume you. That night, Isabella lay awake again, torn between Evelyn's trembling warnings and Daniel's fierce promises. Her heart felt like a battlefield, every beat a clash between loyalty and desire. 2 days later, the choice was forced upon her. She was walking near the old stables when she heard raised voices. Curiosity drew her closer until she saw Charles and Daniel standing face to face, fury sparking between them. You have no place here, Charles spat. Leave, or I'll make sure you never set foot on Carmichael land again. Daniel's eyes blazed. You've spent your life hiding behind lies and power, Charles. But the truth always claws its way out. And when it does, Isabella will see you for the coward you are. Charles lunged forward, shoving Daniel hard against the stable wall. Stay away from her, Isabella cried out, rushing forward. Stop! Both men froze, their chests heaving, their eyes locked with hatred. Isabella stepped between them, her body trembling. Enough! I won't let you tear each other apart like this. If either of you truly care about me, then prove it by giving me the truth, not your fists. Charles's face twisted with rage, but he said nothing. He turned on his heel and stalked away. Daniel remained, his eyes softer now, filled with something that looked almost like sorrow. Izzy, he whispered, his voice breaking. I never wanted this war to touch you, but it seems the only way to protect you is to fight it. Isabella's heart ached as she looked at him. She knew the path ahead was dangerous, perhaps even fatal. But as his hand reached for hers, steady and strong, she felt herself step willingly into the fire. The mansion seemed to breathe uneasily after the confrontation at the stables, its walls carrying whispers of fury and betrayal. Isabella felt every shadow watching her, every floorboard, groaning beneath her as though the house itself judged her wavering heart. Charles had not spoken to her since storming away, his silence more terrifying than his anger. Evelyn hovered anxiously, her soft words always tinged with warning. But it was Daniel's absence that gnawed at Isabella most, his shadow lingering in her thoughts no matter how she tried to shut it out. One morning, Isabella found herself drawn to her father's study. The room had remained untouched since his death, dust coating the shelves of books, and the faint scent of tobacco lingering in the air. She sat at his desk, running her fingers over the worn leather surface. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to weep. The tears came hot and sudden, spilling from her eyes until she collapsed forward, burying her face in her arms. Father, she whispered, her voice broken, why did you leave me with this burden? Why didn't you tell me the truth before you died? I don't know who to trust. I don't know what to believe. Her sobs echoed through the silence. But then, very faintly, she heard a creak near the bookshelf. She froze, her tears drying instantly as she lifted her head. Slowly, she rose and moved toward the sound. Her eyes scanned the row of books, until she noticed one volume, slightly out of place. She tugged at it, and with a reluctant groan, the shelf shifted open to reveal a hidden compartment. Inside was a bundle of papers tied with a faded ribbon. Isabella pulled them out, her hands trembling. The top page bore her father's handwriting. She unfolded it carefully and began to read. To my beloved Isabella, if you are reading this, then the shadows I feared have finally reached you. Daniel is not your enemy, though he has every right to hate me. I wronged his family, and in my guilt, I feared the day you would discover the truth. But know this, love is not always born in light. Sometimes it grows in darkness, stronger for having survived it. Trust your heart, my daughter. It will lead you where reason cannot. Isabella's breath caught, her heart hammering in her chest. Her father had known. He had known about Daniel, about the history that bound them, and still he had left her with nothing but riddles. Yet the words felt like a fragile rope thrown across the abyss she was standing on. Daniel is not your enemy. Clutching the letter, she fled the study, her mind racing. She had to see him. She had to tell him. That evening, under the cloak of dusk, Isabella slipped beyond the gates of the estate and followed the path into the woods. The air was cool, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine. She had almost convinced herself she would not find him when a figure emerged from the shadows. Daniel. He looked weary, his face gaunt with sleepless nights. But when his eyes met hers, the storm within them softened. You shouldn't be here, he said, though his voice lacked conviction. I found something, she said breathlessly, holding out the letter. My father? He wrote this. He admitted everything. He wronged your family. He said you're not my enemy. Daniel took the paper, his hands shaking as he read. His jaw tightened, his throat working as he swallowed hard. When he finished, he closed his eyes and pressed the page to his chest. For so long, I thought I was alone in this truth, he whispered. To see his words, to know he carried that guilt. It changes everything. Isabella stepped closer, her voice trembling. Then let this feud end here, Daniel. Let's not carry their sins any further. We don't have to be enemies. We don't have to destroy each other. His eyes opened, burning with intensity as he looked at her. And what do you want us to be, Izzy? The question hung between them, heavy with longing and fear. Isabella's lips parted, but no words came. Instead, she reached for his hand, lacing her fingers with his. The warmth of his skin seared into her, and in that moment, she knew her choice. Daniel pulled her into his arms, his embrace fierce and desperate, as though he feared she might vanish. His lips found hers, and the world fell away. For the first time, Isabella felt whole, as though every shattered piece of her had been fitted back together by his touch. But even as passion burned between them, dread lingered at the edges of her mind. Charles would never forgive this. Evelyn's warnings echoed like a ghost, alive or destroyed. It's a thin line. Days turned into weeks, their secret meetings continuing in the woods, in the abandoned chapel on the edge of the estate, anywhere they could steal moments away from watchful eyes. Every encounter deepened their bond, every whispered promise carved into their hearts like scripture. Yet danger crept ever closer. Charles grew more erratic, his paranoia spilling over into rage. He questioned servants, searched Isabella's room, even locked the gates at night. Still, Isabella found ways to escape. Her determination only fueled Charles's suspicion, until one evening he confronted her outright. "You think I don't know where you go?" he snarled, cornering her in the corridor. "You think I don't see the fire in your eyes when his name is spoken? You're betraying this family, Izzy. You're spitting on our father's grave." Her hands clenched into fists. "Our father already confessed his sins. He admitted what he did to Daniel's family. Don't you see? This fight isn't ours to continue." Charles's face darkened, his eyes wild. "So you'd rather lie with the enemy? You'd rather hand him the keys to everything we built?" "I'd rather choose love over hatred," she whispered fiercely. His hand shot out, gripping her arm so tightly she winced. "You'll regret this. I'll make sure of it." That night, Isabella could not sleep. Fear twisted in her gut, not only for herself but for Daniel. Charles's threat had been clear, and she knew he would stop at nothing to sever the bond between them. The following day, Isabella slipped away earlier than usual, desperate to warn Daniel. When she found him waiting in the chapel, she rushed into his arms. "Charles knows," she gasped. "He's going to try to stop us." "I don't know what he's planning, but it's dangerous." Daniel's expression hardened. "Let him try. I've survived worse than Charles Carmichael's temper." "No," she insisted, gripping his shirt. "You don't understand. He isn't just angry, he's desperate. And desperate men are the most dangerous of all." Daniel cupped her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his gaze. "Izzy, listen to me. I've lived my life in shadows, driven by vengeance. But with you, I've found something worth fighting for, not destroying. If Charles comes for me, I won't run. I won't let him dictate our fate." Tears stung Isabella's eyes. She leaned into his touch, her voice breaking. "Promise me you'll be careful. Promise me you won't let this hatred take you away from me." He kissed her forehead, lingering there as though sealing a vow. "I promise." But even as he spoke the words, both of them knew that promises were fragile things, easily shattered by the storm already gathering on the horizon. The night air in Carmichael Hollow grew heavier, thick with tension, as if the land itself sensed the battle brewing within the family. Isabella wandered sleepless through the darkened mansion, her footsteps echoing softly against marble floors. She could still feel Daniel's arms around her, the heat of his vow, but her brother's threats hung over her like a blade. The thought of losing Daniel by Charles's hand or by his own, fury, filled her with a terror that stole her breath. In the morning, the household buzzed with a strange energy. Servants whispered in corners, their eyes darting nervously toward the windows. Isabella overheard fragments of conversation as she passed. Something about Charles riding out at dawn, about weapons hidden in the stables. Her blood ran cold. She hurried outside, her skirts brushing against dew-soaked grass, and searched for Evelyn. She found her by the orchard, gathering herbs with trembling hands. "Where's Charles?" Isabella demanded. Evelyn's lips pressed into a thin line. "Gone. He left before sunrise." He didn't tell me where, but I can guess. You know as well as I do. Isabella's chest tightened. Daniel. Evelyn nodded, tears glimmering in her eyes. He means to finish this, Izzy. He'll provoke him until one of them falls. You mustn't go after them. I can't just wait, Isabella said fiercely. If Charles kills him or if Daniel kills Charles, I'll never forgive myself. I have to stop this. Evelyn's voice broke. And if you're caught between them? If their hatred swallows you whole? Then so be it, Isabella whispered. I'd rather risk everything than live with the ashes of what could have been. Without waiting for Evelyn's protest, she gathered her cloak and mounted her horse, urging it down the winding road toward the forest. The path was familiar now. Every turn carried memories of stolen moments, of whispered confessions beneath the trees. But today, fear drove her faster, the wind stinging her cheeks as branches clawed at her cloak. She found them at the clearing near the river, the place where the trees parted to reveal the broken remains of an old stone bridge. Charles stood on one side, his pistol drawn, his face twisted with rage. Daniel stood opposite him, his stance calm but his eyes blazing, his own weapon gleaming faintly in the morning light. You don't belong here, Charles spat. This land, this family, it's ours. You're nothing but a ghost clinging to a name that isn't yours. Daniel's voice cut like steel. Your father built his fortune on my family's blood. He stole everything from us, our land, our dignity, our lives. You defend him because you're afraid to face the truth. But I will not let lies bury us any longer. Isabella's cry pierced the standoff. Stop! She dismounted, rushing between them. Her arms spread wide as if her frail body could shield them both from their hatred. I won't let you do this. Not with blood, not with bullets. Please, look at me, both of you. Is this what father would want? Is this what justice looks like? Charles's jaw clenched, his hand tightening on the pistol. Move, Izzy, you don't understand. He's using you. He's poisoning you against your own blood. Her eyes filled with tears, but her voice rang steady. No, Charles. It's you who can't see. Father admitted the truth. He confessed his guilt. Daniel isn't the enemy, our hatred is. Daniel lowered his pistol slightly, his gaze locked on Isabella. Izzy! His voice cracked, raw with emotion. If you ask me to stop, I will. For you, I would give up everything. The sincerity in his words hung in the air like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. But Charles's fury only deepened, his face contorted with betrayal. So it's true, he hissed. You love him. Isabella turned to her brother, tears streaming down her cheeks. Yes, I love him. And no amount of your rage will change that. For a moment, silence reigned, broken only by the river's distant rush. Then, with a snarl, Charles raised his pistol. Isabella screamed as the shot rang out, the crack shattering the morning stillness. She braced for pain, for darkness, but it did not come. Instead, Daniel staggered, clutching his shoulder where blood blossomed through his shirt. His pistol clattered to the ground as he sank to one knee, his teeth gritted against the agony. Daniel! Isabella cried, dropping beside him, her hands pressing desperately against the wound. Her vision blurred with panic. No, stay with me, please. Charles stood frozen, the smoking pistol trembling in his grip. His chest heaved as though he, too, could not believe what he had done. For the first time, doubt flickered in his eyes. Isabella's voice broke through his haze, sharp and furious. Do you see what your hatred has done? Do you see what you've become? Charles staggered back, his face pale, his hands shaking. He dropped the pistol into the grass and turned away, stumbling toward his horse. Without a word, he mounted and fled, the thunder of hooves fading into the distance. Left alone in the clearing, Isabella cradled Daniel's head in her lap, her tears falling onto his skin. His face was pale, his breath shallow, but when his eyes met hers, a weak smile curved his lips. You're safe, he whispered hoarsely. That's all that matters. No, she sobbed, pressing harder against the wound. You matter. You have to live for me. Do you hear me, Daniel? You can't leave me. His hand, slick with blood, rose shakily to touch her cheek. I'm not leaving. Not if you believe in me. Your love, it's stronger than any bullet. Isabella's heart clenched. She tore strips from her cloak, binding the wound with trembling hands. Every movement was fueled by desperation, by the certainty that she could not lose him now, not when they had only just begun to live. With great effort, she helped him to his feet, his arm draped over her shoulders. Together they staggered toward the old chapel, each step agonizing but necessary. The walls that once held their stolen kisses now became a refuge, the cracked stone sheltering them from the storm of vengeance outside. All through the night, Isabella tended to him, refusing to sleep. She cleaned the wound, whispered words of comfort, and prayed to a God she wasn't sure still listened. Daniel drifted in and out of consciousness, his murmurs filled with fragments of memory, his family's faces, the bitterness of loss, and always her name, like a talisman on his lips. At dawn, Evelyn arrived, her face pale when she saw the blood-soaked bandages. "Oh, Izzy," she breathed, kneeling beside them. "What have you done?" "I saved him," Isabella said fiercely. "And I'll keep saving him. I won't let Charles's hatred destroy us." Evelyn's eyes brimmed with tears. She reached out, brushing Daniel's damp hair from his forehead. "Then we must work quickly. Charles won't stop. If he failed once, he'll come again, and harder." Daniel stirred, his eyes fluttering open. He looked between the sisters, his voice weak but steady. "Let him come. I'll be ready. This fight isn't just mine anymore, it's ours." Isabella clasped his hand, her heart swelling with both dread and determination. She knew Evelyn was right. Charles would not rest until he had ripped them apart. But she also knew one thing with absolute certainty. She would not let go of Daniel, no matter the cost. As the first rays of sunlight pierced the broken windows of the chapel, Isabella realized the battle was no longer just about the sins of the past. It was about survival, about love defying hate, about building a future from ruins. And for that, she was willing to fight until her last breath. The days that followed the shooting blurred into a haze of fear and fever. Isabella remained at Daniel's side in the chapel, her world narrowing to the shallow rhythm of his breath and the warmth of his pulse beneath her. Trembling fingers. Every time his eyes fluttered shut for too long, panic surged through her like a tidal wave. Evelyn did her best to help, but even she could not hide the terror that shadowed her face. By the third night, Isabella had stopped counting the hours. Her gown was stained with blood, her hair tangled from sleepless nights, but none of it mattered. All that mattered was the rise and fall of Daniel's chest. When at last his fever broke, relief crashed over her so powerfully that she collapsed against him, sobbing into his shoulder. Daniel stirred, his voice raspy but steady. "Izzy, you stayed." She lifted her head, tears streaking her face. "Of course I stayed. Where else would I go?" His hand, weak but insistent, found hers. "You should have run. You should have saved yourself from this madness." "I would rather die with you than live without you," she said fiercely, her voice trembling. "Don't you understand that yet?" His eyes softened, a flicker of warmth breaking through his pain. Then maybe love is stronger than vengeance after all. Their fragile peace, however, was short-lived. By the end of the week, rumors reached them, whispers, carried by frightened servants who dared to sneak into the chapel with bread and water. Charles had not vanished into regret as Isabella had hoped. He had returned with fire in his veins, gathering allies, bribing men from town with promises of wealth and power. He was raising an army not just against Daniel, but against anyone who dared to defy him. One servant, trembling as he placed a basket on the altar, whispered, "He calls Daniel a trespasser, a thief of Carmichael blood. He says you've betrayed the family, Miss Isabella. He means to burn this chapel to the ground if you do not come home." The basket slipped from Isabella's hands, apples rolling across the stone floor. She felt her breath leave her, as if the very walls had caved in around her. Daniel pushed himself upright despite Evelyn's protests, his wounded shoulder still bandaged. His voice was rough but steady. "Then let him come. If he wants fire, let him light it. I won't hide any longer." "Daniel, no," Isabella pleaded, kneeling beside him. "You're still weak. You can't fight him like this. You'll be killed." His gaze met hers, unwavering. "I've lived my whole life waiting for this reckoning. If I must bleed again, then so be it. But I won't let Charles destroy us without a fight." Evelyn wrung her hands, tears brimming in her eyes. "You'll both be destroyed. Can't you see? This feud is a curse. It will swallow every last one of us." "Then help us break it," Isabella said suddenly, turning to her sister. "We don't have to let him write the ending. We can choose something different." Evelyn shook her head in disbelief. "How? Charles won't listen to me." "He won't listen to anyone." Isabella's heart pounded as a desperate idea took shape. "Then we won't ask him to listen. We'll show him. We'll show everyone. If we stand together, if we make our truth undeniable, he can't erase it." That night, Isabella and Daniel spoke of plans, their whispered voices weaving a fragile hope. They would confront Charles not in secret, but in the open, before the town, before the very people he sought to manipulate. If they revealed the truth of her father's confession, if they laid bare the sins of the past, perhaps they could end this cycle of blood once and for all. But the plan was perilous. Daniel's wound had barely healed. Charles's men were many. And yet, as Isabella looked into Daniel's eyes, she felt a strength surge within her that she had never known before. Love had given her courage, and courage was a weapon sharper than any blade. The day of reckoning came sooner than they expected. Smoke rose in the distance one morning as villagers fled into the woods, warning that Charles and his men were marching toward the chapel. Isabella felt the earth tremble with the drum of hooves, the clank of weapons. She tightened the ties of her cloak, her hand steady as she gripped Daniel's. "Whatever happens," she whispered, "we face it together." The doors of the chapel shook as Charles's men surrounded it, torches blazing. Charles himself strode forward, his eyes wild, his voice booming. "Isabella Carmichael, you shame this family with every breath you take beside that bastard? Come out or I'll burn you both alive." Isabella's heart pounded, but she forced her chin high. With Daniel at her side and Evelyn trailing reluctantly behind, she pushed open the chapel doors. The crowd hushed, their eyes widening as she stepped into the morning light, her face pale but resolute. "Charles," she called, her voice carrying clear and strong. "You call him a bastard, but it is our father who bore that shame. He stole what was not his. He destroyed Daniel's family. You know this is true. You've always known it. And now the world will know it too." A ripple of shock swept through the gathered men. Some lowered their torches, uncertain. Charles's face turned scarlet, his rage boiling over. "Lies," he bellowed. "She's bewitched, poisoned by his deceit." But Isabella stood firm. She held aloft the letter she had found in her father's study, her hand trembling only slightly. "This is his confession, written in his own hand. Read it if you dare. Judge for yourself who speaks lies." Gasps rose from the crowd. A few men stepped closer, craning their necks to glimpse the paper. Murmurs broke out, doubt seating itself among Charles's followers. Charles lunged forward, snatching for the letter. But Daniel moved faster despite his injury. He caught Charles's arm, forcing him back with a strength born not of fury but of survival. "Enough, Charles," Daniel growled. "You've let vengeance rot you from the inside. Don't drag her down with you." The two men grappled, their struggle fierce and raw. Isabella cried out, torn between fear for Daniel's wound and terror of Charles's wrath. Evelyn clutched her hand, whispering prayers under her breath. At last, Daniel wrested the pistol from Charles's belt and tossed it aside. He pinned Charles against the chapel wall, his face inches away, his voice low but lethal. "If I wanted revenge, you'd already be dead. But I want something greater than that. I want peace. And I won't let you steal it from me." For the first time, Charles faltered. His eyes darted to the crowd, to the torches now lowered, to the men whose loyalty wavered. His mouth opened, but no words came. Isabella stepped forward, her voice breaking with both fury and love. "Brother, please, end this. Not for me, not for him, but for yourself. Don't let father's sins chain you forever." The silence that followed stretched like eternity. Then, with a strangled cry, Charles shoved Daniel away and collapsed to his knees. His fists struck the dirt as sobs tore from his throat, raw and broken. The sight silenced even the restless crowd. No one moved for a long time. Finally, Evelyn stepped forward, kneeling beside her brother and wrapping her arms around him. Charles resisted at first, his body rigid. But then he crumbled against her, his tears soaking her shoulder. Daniel stood back, his chest heaving, his face etched with both exhaustion and relief. Isabella's eyes met his, and in that shared gaze was the fragile hope that, maybe, just maybe, the curse of vengeance had been broken. Yet as the torches dimmed and the men began to disperse, Isabella felt a shiver crawl down her spine. Something in Charles's surrender felt incomplete, like a storm forced into silence but not yet dispersed. She knew the war was not over, not entirely, and in the shadows of the chapel, the battle for love and survival was only beginning to shift into a new and uncertain form. For a brief and fragile moment, the air outside the chapel held peace. The crowd had dispersed, some muttering in confusion, others shaken by the sight of Charles breaking down at his sister's feet. The torches that once threatened destruction now lay extinguished in the dirt. But Isabella felt no true relief. Her heart told her what her eyes refused to deny. Storms do not vanish in an instant. They only gather in darker corners, waiting for the chance to strike again. Daniel stood near the chapel doorway, his shoulder aching from the strain of holding Charles back. His breath came in shallow gasps, but his eyes stayed on Isabella. When she turned toward him, their gazes locked in that unspoken tether that had grown stronger with every trial. He nodded faintly as though to reassure her, though the hollowness in his expression betrayed his own doubts. Side the chapel, Charles sat slumped on a bench, his hands trembling. Evelyn remained by his side, her face pale yet determined, as though she alone could anchor her brother to reason. Isabella entered slowly, hesitant to approach, but unwilling to leave the fracture of their family unattended. "Charles," she said softly, kneeling before him, "you've lost so much already. Don't lose yourself too. Father's sins don't have to be yours." His bloodshot eyes lifted to hers, pain swimming in their depths. "You think this ends with me kneeling in shame? You think the world forgives so easily?" His voice cracked, his tone a mixture of bitterness and despair. "Our name is ruined. Our land will be stolen. Our father's legacy, ashes." Evelyn reached for his hand. "Legacies can be rebuilt, not with hatred, but with truth. You saw what happened out there?" The men wavered because they finally saw the truth. "You don't have to fight anymore." But Charles shook his head violently, jerking his hand away. They wavered, yes, but only for now. "Do you think men are loyal to honesty? No, they crave strength, dominance, fear. Daniel has stolen that from me, from us. And as long as he breathes, my shadow shrinks smaller." Isabella's throat tightened. She glanced at Daniel, who had stepped into the chapel, listening in silence. His face was unreadable, but his hand twitched as though resisting the urge to reach for her. "Charles," Daniel said finally, his voice calm but firm, "this isn't about shadows anymore. This is about ending a war that never should have begun. You and I are both victims of your father's greed. You lost your innocence. I lost my family. But we don't have to keep losing. Not unless you choose it." Charles's gaze flickered toward him, and for the barest second there was hesitation, an opening, a glimpse of the boy he once was before vengeance consumed him. But the moment closed as swiftly as it came. His jaw hardened, his eyes narrowing once more. "You speak as though you understand me," he spat. "But you can never understand. You've taken my sister's heart. You've humiliated me before my men. And you think words will heal that?" Daniel's voice dropped lower, steadier. "No, I don't expect words to heal anything. But maybe actions can." He stepped closer, ignoring Isabella's sharp intake of breath. Slowly, he knelt before Charles, lowering himself until his wounded shoulder brushed the cold stone floor. Isabella's heart pounded. Daniel, proud and unyielding, kneeling before the very man who had tried to kill him. "If you must end this with my death," Daniel said quietly, "then do it now. Kill me and the feud dies with me. But if you can't, if some part of you still knows there is another way, then walk away from vengeance. For her, for yourself." Silence hung heavy in the chapel. Charles stared at him, his breath ragged, his fists clenching and unclenching. The sight of Daniel kneeling should have filled him with triumph, yet instead it carved a deeper hollow into his chest. His lips trembled as though he might speak, but no words came. Isabella, unable to hold back, rushed forward and wrapped her arms around Daniel, pulling him to his feet. "Enough," she whispered fiercely. "You've given him the choice. If he cannot see it, then that is his burden, not yours." But Charles did not strike. Instead, he rose abruptly, his face twisted with conflict. Without another word, he stormed from the chapel, the heavy doors slamming behind him. The sound echoed like thunder in the stillness. Evelyn pressed her hands to her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I don't know if he'll return with a sword or with surrender," she whispered. Neither did Isabella, and that uncertainty gnawed at her more than any blade. The days that followed were tense with anticipation. Charles vanished from sight, leaving behind whispers of his presence, shadows glimpsed in the woods, hoofbeats in the night. Villagers carried rumors that he had retreated to the Carmichael estate, gathering wealth, writing letters to men of power in neighboring towns. Others claimed he had disappeared altogether, leaving behind only ruin. But Isabella knew better. She felt his presence like a storm lurking beyond the horizon, unseen but inevitable. Daniel, though still healing, grew restless. He spent his days reinforcing the chapel with the help of loyal villagers, turning the holy place into a fortress should Charles return. Isabella hated the sight of it, stone walls, meant for prayer now lined with barricades. But she did not stop him. In her heart, she feared he was right to prepare. One evening, as twilight painted the sky in hues of violet and gold, Isabella found Daniel standing by the altar, staring at the flickering candles. His profile glowed in the soft light, his expression etched with weariness. "Do you regret it?" she asked quietly, stepping closer. He turned, confusion in his eyes. Regret what? Kneeling to him. Giving him the choice. Her voice trembled. What if he sees it as weakness? What if it only feeds his hatred? Daniel reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers. Maybe it was weakness. Or maybe it was strength. I don't know anymore. But I know this. Violence has already stolen too much from us. If I must stand before him unarmed again to prove that love is stronger than hate, then I will. Her throat tightened with unshed tears. You'll die for that belief. Then let me die for something worth more than revenge, he said softly. She buried her face against his chest, clinging to him as though her love alone could shield him from death. The storm broke sooner than expected. It was a moonless night, when the sound of galloping hooves shattered the chapel's fragile peace. Isabella jolted awake, her heart pounding as shouts rose outside. Daniel was already moving, his pistol in hand, his eyes hard. Evelyn burst into the room, breathless. He's here, she gasped. Charles, he's brought men. More than before. The three of them hurried into the chapel's nave, where loyal villagers had gathered, weapons clutched nervously. Outside, the Carmichael banners fluttered in the darkness, torches blazing like hungry eyes. Charles's voice rang out colder than ice. You had your chance, Daniel. You chose to kneel, but you did not die. Tonight you will. Daniel stepped forward, his face illuminated by candlelight. He raised his voice so all could hear. Then let it be tonight, Charles. But know this, you're not just killing me. You're killing your sister's heart. You're killing whatever shred of honor your family name still holds. Laughter, harsh and broken, carried from outside. Honor? That word died with father. All that remains is power. And I will not let you take even that from me. The villagers shifted uneasily, some glancing toward Isabella, others at Daniel. Fear rippled through them, but so did resolve. Isabella stepped forward, her cloak trailing on the stone floor, her voice rising above the din. Charles Carmichael, she cried. Look at me, your sister. If you set fire to this chapel, you burn me with it. Is that the legacy you want? Is that the mark you'll leave on this world, that you murdered? Your own blood and cold hatred? A pause. Even in the dark, she could sense his hesitation. But then his voice, strained yet unyielding, came again. If that is what must be done, then so be it. Isabella's knees buckled, but Daniel caught her before she could fall. His eyes blazed with fury, not at her weakness, but at Charles's unrelenting cruelty. And so the night exploded in violence. Torches flew through the air, shattering against the chapel's stone walls. Men charged, swords clashing, shouts echoing. Daniel fought with every ounce of strength left in him, his wounded shoulder screaming in protest. Villagers rallied at his side, defending their sanctuary with desperate courage. Isabella, though terrified, refused to cower. She moved among the fighters, pulling the wounded to safety, pressing cloth against bleeding wounds. Evelyn stayed with her, her fear swallowed by the need to protect her family. Outside, Charles cut through the chaos like a man possessed, his blade flashing in the torchlight. His eyes sought Daniel with unholy obsession, as though slaying him would erase every wound carved into his pride. At last, the two men clashed in the chapel courtyard, their swords striking with brutal force. Sparks flew, steel rang, and Isabella's screams tore through the night as she watched the man she loved battle her own brother. Daniel fought with precision, every strike measured, every parry fueled not by rage but by necessity. Charles, in contrast, fought like a storm, wild and merciless. Their blades locked, sweat dripping, breaths ragged. You should have died the night I shot you, Charles snarled. Perhaps, Daniel growled, shoving him back, but love kept me alive. That is something you will never understand. The words only fueled Charles's fury. He lunged, driving Daniel to his knees. Gasps erupted from the villagers. Isabella cried out, rushing forward, but Evelyn held her back, whispering, No, you'll be killed. Daniel's sword clattered to the ground. Charles loomed above him, blade raised high. For a heartbeat, victory seemed certain. But then Daniel's hand darted to the earth, seizing a fallen dagger. With one swift motion, he slashed upward, forcing Charles back. Both men staggered, blood mingling with sweat, eyes locked in hatred and defiance. And in that moment, Isabella knew. The war between love and revenge had reached its breaking point. The courtyard reeked of smoke, blood, and fear. The chapel walls flickered with shadows from burning torches, and the sound of clashing steel drowned every prayer that had ever been whispered in that sacred place. Isabella's screams echoed into the night as she watched her brother and the man she loved circle one another, their blades dripping crimson, their faces carved with exhaustion and rage. Daniel staggered but did not fall. Every breath he drew was sharp, every movement heavy, but his determination burned with a light that refused to dim. Charles, by contrast, fought as though possessed by something unholy. His eyes gleamed wild, his teeth bared in fury, his sword lashing with reckless ferocity. To him, this was not merely a duel, it was annihilation. The only way to erase the shame he believed had cursed his bloodline. "You think you've won her?" Charles spat between gritted teeth, pressing forward with another vicious strike. "But you've only stolen what was mine to protect. You've poisoned her against me." Daniel blocked the blow, the force rattling his arm to the bone. "No one poisoned her, Charles. She chose me. She chose truth over lies, love over fear. You can't change that with a blade." Their swords locked, faces inches apart, sweat mingling with the rain that had begun to fall from the black sky. For a moment, their struggle seemed eternal, as though the storm itself had paused to watch. But Charles broke the deadlock with a roar, forcing Daniel back. Sparks flew as steel scraped stone, and Isabella cried out, rushing forward before Evelyn caught her arm, yanking her back into the relative safety of the chapel doorway. "No," Evelyn pleaded. "If you go near them now, you'll die." "I can't just stand here," Isabella sobbed, her heart tearing as she watched Daniel stumble. His wound from weeks past had never healed fully, and blood now seeped through the fresh tear in his shoulder. Every strike he parried drained him further. And Charles saw it. His grin twisted, his strikes growing bolder, faster, fueled by the scent of victory. "You're weakening," he sneered. "Soon you'll be nothing but another corpse rotting under Carmichael soil." Daniel's chest heaved, his strength flickering like the candles in the chapel. Yet he lifted his blade once more, eyes locked on Isabella's across the chaos. That look alone gave him the will to endure. "You've forgotten something." "Charles," Daniel rasped, his voice rough but steady. "Corpses don't fight for love, and I'll fight until my last breath." Their swords clashed again, ringing out like thunder. The crowd of villagers held their ground, torn between terror and awe as the two men battled beneath the storm. Some prayed aloud, others clutched their weapons, uncertain if they should intervene. The duel surged toward the chapel steps, and Isabella could bear it no longer. She wrenched free from Evelyn's grasp, darting forward, her voice carrying through the storm. "Stop this! Both of you! Can't you see there is nothing left to win?" Her cry froze them for the briefest instant. Daniel's blade hovered in midair. Charles's arm trembled, his sword inches from Daniel's throat. Both men turned toward her, their expressions raw, stripped of armor and rage. "Isabella," Daniel breathed, his knees nearly buckling. "Don't—" But Charles's gaze hardened again. The moment of humanity vanished as swiftly as it came. "You'd beg for his life?" he demanded, his voice venomous. "Even after everything? Then you are no sister of mine." With a snarl, he raised his blade to strike. Time slowed. Isabella's scream tore from her throat, raw and desperate. Daniel, though weakened, lunged upward with the last of his strength, his blade colliding with Charles's in a shower of sparks. The force knocked both men off balance. They stumbled, blades clattering, fists colliding as the duel shifted from steel to flesh. They grappled in the mud, rain pelting down, fists striking with bone-crushing force. Blood mixed with water, staining the earth beneath them. Charles struck Daniel's wounded shoulder, and Daniel gasped in agony, collapsing to his knees. "No!" Isabella cried, sprinting forward despite Evelyn's pleas. She threw herself between them just as Charles raised his sword again. "Isabella, move!" he shouted, his voice cracking. But she didn't. She spread her arms wide, shielding Daniel with her own body. "If you want him dead," she screamed, tears blinding her, "you'll have to kill me first." The courtyard fell silent. Even the rain seemed to hold its breath. Charles froze, his blade trembling above his sister. His chest heaved, his face twisted with rage. But behind his eyes, there it was again. That flicker of doubt. That boy who once held her hand when storms frightened her, who once promised to protect her from the world. His lips quivered, his arm shaking. "Move," he whispered hoarsely. "Don't make me do this." "I won't move," Isabella said, her voice breaking but resolute. "Because I still believe the brother I love is in there somewhere. I won't let hatred bury him alive." Her words pierced deeper than any blade. Charles staggered back, his sword slipping from his hand. His body trembled violently, his face contorting between fury and grief. "You don't understand," he choked. "If I let go of this, if I stop fighting, then everything Father built is gone. Everything I've lived for is meaningless." Daniel, bloodied but unbroken, struggled to his feet, his hand pressed to his wound. "Then let it be meaningless," he said quietly. "Because nothing built on blood and lies is worth saving. Let it fall, Charles. Let it fall so you can finally be free." The villagers watched in stunned silence as Charles fell to his knees, his body racked with sobs. The storm raged above them, but the battle was over, not by steel, but by the sheer force of love and truth. Isabella dropped beside her brother, wrapping her arms around him despite the blood and the rain. "I forgive you," she whispered fiercely. "Even if you cannot forgive yourself, I forgive you. And that is enough." Charles clung to her like a drowning man, his tears hot against her shoulder. For the first time, he looked less like an enemy and more like the broken man he truly was. In the days that followed, the Carmichael estate fell silent. Charles, though spared, disappeared into the countryside, leaving behind the land, the title, and the shadow of his father's legacy. Some said he sought redemption in distant lands. Others whispered he could never escape the ghosts of his past. But Isabella held on to hope that someday her brother would return, not as an enemy, but as family. The villagers rebuilt what had been destroyed. The chapel walls were cleaned of blood, the pews restored, the bells once more ringing with prayers rather than cries of battle. And through it all, Isabella and Daniel remained side by side, their bond tempered by fire, their love unshaken by the storm. Daniel's scars never fully healed. On stormy nights, pain flared through his shoulder, reminding him of the battles fought and nearly lost. Yet whenever he faltered, Isabella was there, her hand steady, her love unwavering. One evening, months after the final clash, they stood on the chapel steps, watching the sun set over fields washed golden with spring. Daniel took her hand, his eyes soft, his voice quiet. "We survived," he murmured, almost in disbelief. Isabella smiled through the tears that filled her eyes. "We did more than survive. We found something worth living for." He kissed her then, not with the desperate hunger of stolen moments, but with the steady certainty of a man who had finally found peace. Around them, the world was no longer burning, no longer divided between revenge and love. It was theirs, fragile but real, a new beginning rising from the ashes of old sins. And though the ghosts of betrayal and loss would always linger in memory, Isabella knew the truth with unshakable clarity. Love had not only endured, it had triumphed. The storm had passed, and the story of Isabella and Daniel, born of shadows and blood, ended not in tragedy, but in the light of redemption.